Today I'm using Photoshop CS3, but again I'm covering the basics and a lot of the things I'll be showing you are transferable into different versions of Photoshop. If you've never used Photoshop before, this is a tutorial for you. So what is Photoshop and what is it used for? So in my job it's used as a 3D artist, it's used for creating textures. In the game industry it's also used for concept artists to create concept. It's used by UI artists to create user interface like menus and buttons that you click on and icons and such for the game. Other industries use it for creating marketing images, photoshopping as you see in the media, so when you take photos of celebrities or whatnot you might Photoshop them. So it's used for a lot of different things. It's not just for one industry, it's used in multiple different careers and fields and such. So again, today's lesson is just for the basics. So if you do have questions that you want me to cover in a more in-depth tutorial, please leave comments at the bottom and I'll make sure that they're included in my next video. So when using Photoshop, I just want to mention that a lot of us will use a graphics tablet. It doesn't have to be like necessarily a branded one, but commonly people use Wacom tablets or Wacom, however you pronounce it. So these are just, it's because it's easier to, as artists, to draw with a pen and select with a pen the movement of your hand that you use rather than trying to click with a mouse. Clicking with a mouse is just more time consuming and it's not as fluid as using a graphics tablet. If you don't have a graphics tablet and you want to do 3D art and you want to create textures, or you're using Photoshop for another purpose, I highly recommend getting a Wacom tablet. You don't have to necessarily get the flashiest one on the market with all the buttons and that kind of thing. Nowadays you can get pretty reasonable ones from eBay, second-hand ones, the smaller ones, just to get that movement that you want. Okay, so let's start with when you open, you'll get something that looks similar to this. This is your viewport. These are the tools down the side here. On this side, there's different panels, and we can set these up to, once you're more familiar with it, the things that you use quite a lot, you can keep, and the things that you might never use, we can just remove from the scene. So, you might have a small monitor, and you want to limit the amount of things that are on your window. On your screen, so you can go to workspace and you can save it, and the workspace means like here I'll just close some stuff and open some stuff and rearrange it. You can save it, because sometimes I find that Photoshop closes if you've hit hotkeys that rearrange windows or open default settings. You'll be like, oh, how do I get it back? So from the get-go, I'll just save a workspace that I'm happy with. So let's go through some of the basic tools. So if we go to first File, New, to open a new project, what we call Canvas. Here you've got different options, so you can put in a name, but the name, if you put something in here, you can change it later, so don't worry too much about that. If you forget to do it, you don't have to, delete what you've got and restart again or anything like that. You can rename it. The same with the height, really, and the width. There's options later to change it should you want to change that. You've got other information, but I don't want to go into it too much because, again, this is a beginner's lesson. So just for beginners, you've got your sizes. Things you might want to know is the different options here. So for graphic artists we use pixels. So game resolutions are usually 256, 512, 1024. Above that I've yet to use them. So yeah, we keep to those ratios. So some game engines will take something that's more rectangle, so it might take a 512 by 1024, but that's where so 1024 is pretty generous game size, so we'll go with that. So we can see here that we've got a blank canvas. When we draw and we do stuff, we want to use layers. So here we've got the layer button. If we click on it, it creates a layer. Now the purpose of a layer is so we can work and we can do stuff, but it gives us more freedom to make changes. So this will become clear the more we use Photoshop, but just so that you're aware of what a layer is, it's kind of like, I guess if you were doing more 2D animation like cell shading and that kind of thing, how they have like their base layer, and on top of that they have like a it's not king foam, but it's like a plastic sheet, and on that will be another thing, and on top of that it's another sheet with another thing. So it's just layers, so at some point you can just remove it or turn off a layer without it affecting the things below it or above it. So, and also layers, we can change things on a layer, so we can have blend modes and opacity. So let me just show you quickly what those do. So if I just quickly think on one layer, so that's my one layer, and I'm gonna go through what I've done. This is the purpose of showing you the layers, not the purpose of showing you how to draw. So I've got my two layers. So if I made this and I thought, oh, I actually want the red thing to be below the other one, I'd bring it down. So layers give us that freedom and that option. We can change the blend mode. So just run through these. A lot of times when I'm creating textures and I want to make things be more, have dirt layers and grunge and that kind of thing, I'll put a texture on or a photo or I'll draw something, and then I'll just literally go through the modes and see what looks the best for what I want. So to know that they're there and to use them, that's good. So we've also got opacity, so how transparent and opaque the object is, and this is per layer. We've also got options to, as I said before, you can turn it off, turn it on. Just going to pull this back layer to show you another option. So if I put this back on normal, so say I had, say if these were, I don't know, say it's a cloud for a game, and I wanted to add a little bit of colouring to the cloud. So I've painted on my red, but it's kind of like I want it to only fill within the cloud. So what I can do is, the quickest option is if I click the layer that I want to cut back, and I hold Alt on the keyboard and I click just between the two layers, it basically says I want this layer to only be shown wherever the layer I'm defining is visible. So that's why it cuts off. So you haven't destructed it. Like, what I mean by that is this layer, I've not deleted it, I've just basically added a mask, if you like. It's just a form of controlling how much of it I see. So I use that quite a bit sometimes. We've got fill as well. I'm going to show you fill later because it's better in a different scenario to show it in now, but with fill, what else have we got? We've got lock, so here you can see this little lock symbol. So say I've done something and I'm happy with it, you don't want to accidentally, because it's easy to do where you accidentally delete something or tweak something and not realise that you've been on this specific layer and you've done something, and then a few steps later you realise, oh, I've actually made changes. So I tend to lock layers when I finish with them and I'm happy with them. I don't want to edit them anymore. You can come back to them obviously later, click the arrow, click the lock, sorry, and then it's unlocked again. So that's good to know. What else do we have? We've got options here which I've determined to use. Let me think about layers. What can we do with layers? You can delete them. You can drag them to the little box trash can down here. You can sometimes hit delete on your keyboard and it would work. For some reason mine's not. We can rename them. So if you double click, I find sometimes if you click over where there's no text, you'll get this layer style, which we'll go into in a second. So really click over where the text is, and then you can put, you know, whatever you want with the name. And I do when I'm working, when I come up with something a bit more useful than ZZZ, but when you're making textures, you're going to have quite a lot of layers. So I might name stuff like scratches or highlights, midtones, shadows, decals. You know, I actually label stuff that, because you know you don't want to come back later and someone says, can you make a change? And you're like, oh, which layer was that on? And you could literally have 20 layers, you know, or more. So again, just be aware that, you know, just keep your files organized and you know, name them accordingly. We can click on a layer, we can drag it to the layout. We click this to create a new layer, but you can also drag a layer onto it and it basically copies it. There are keyboard shortcuts for this, but I'm not going to confuse you by saying that now. Let's just go with this is how you do it. I'm going to drag that one, delete it. We can come down here on the folders and we'll get a new folder. So say if I was creating a texture, I would call this diffuse or albedo or whatever you want to call it, because it's a diffuse map. I will click on one, hold shift and click on the bottom and select in between. I click and move to diffuse. Now they're all in a folder, and that's useful if I later create a normal map. You know, I don't want to have everything on just layers, because if you want to come in and just, you know, just only work on diffuse map, you want to be able to turn off your normal map, turn off your spec map and everything else, and just work on the layers that are included with the diffuse. What else can we do? Oh, we can, I use this sometimes, you can right click and you can add colour tags to them. So you might want to label, you know, diffuse one colour, spec another colour, you know, but you've got folders for that. So sometimes I use it for things that I want on in the scene and things I want off. So for example, say if I'm happy with my texture and I've decided to turn that one off, I might put it grey. And the reason I do this is because there's a shortcut where you can hold Alt and click. And Alt and click will let you just see the layer that you've got selected, or the layer that you're clicking on. And the reason why I label some layers to indicate to me that they're turned off is because if I accidentally now click on another one, I can't actually click Alt and turn them back on. So you know, so what I mean is, like, if I do it again, Alt click, it turns that one and that one and that one and that one back on. So it remembers what I had on. But if I click it and click something else and forget that Alt key, I've lost it then. And there's been a few times where, you know, I've got a scene and I've got things that are off and on, and I've got, you know, quite a few layers that to then try and work out what was on and what was off, that could take quite a bit of time. So I do use that for that purpose. So I think that's everything, like basic with layers. Other options we've got at the bottom here are, as I mentioned before, if you double click you'll get this layer style window, and this is used for effects. So example of that is, and for games I don't tend to use these that often. Actually I use Outer Glow, Inner Glow quite a lot to get a look of wear and tear and just edge work. I don't tend to use these other ones, but you know, again, it's different artists, there's different ways to do things, so you know, you might find that you do use them, which is something I don't. They're a beginner's lesson, I'm not going to go into them too much, it's just to show that they're there. I do see some people quite a lot use these like bevel and embossing, and sometimes it looks okay, but I think it looks okay if you edit them afterwards and you make them a little bit more natural, because these sometimes feel too clean and too just processed and computerized. So they can be good as a starting point, or they could be good to, if you're not familiar with lighting and where your shadows and that kind of thing should be on something. They're good as to put them on to see, okay, this is what I need to do to make something go in and go out and that kind of thing. But then I'll transfer that onto my other layer just by visually looking at it and just using it as a guide. Yes, as I mentioned before, we've got the Inner Glow, Outer Glow. You can change the colour, so you can click on it here. So I want the Outer Glow to be my normal colour, I want the Outer Glow to be a little bit brighter. Normally I'd change the blend mode. Again, you can just scroll through them. You've got the sizes as well. You can change opacity. Because again, a lot of times you just want it to be subtle. Different contours, again, you can just play with them to see what you feel is best, the result that you're looking for. What's that? Layers, another big thing, as I mentioned before. So let's go, I'm just going to take off this clear layer file. Back to basics. Okay, so I've got these two things, and as I mentioned before, if I wanted to only show this red where this is visible, I can hit Alt and we get that. Another way of doing it, and in games we'll use it so much, is to create a mask. So if I select this layer, and if I click Control and click on this window, it will select where the colour is solid, basically. So you see how there's a little bit not got. So not selected. So to say you were happy with that, you can add and select this bit, but that's a little bit later down in the tutorial. So I can go to this layer, and I can see it's selected. I can click on Mask. Boom. There you go. So basically, in this window, in this sort of mask layer, whatever's black I will not see. Whatever's white I will see. And these are used in alpha channels. And in games we use it to create plants and decals and that kind of thing. But for the purpose of this, I've used it just to define an area where I see this red. An easy way to remember it is if you're in a dark room, you don't see nothing. If it's pitch black, you don't see anything. If it's light, white, you see. So remember it that way. You're painting in white where you want to see something, and you're painting in black where you don't. Some game engines, if it depends on the company and what software they're using and game engine they're using, you're limited to the amount of colours that you can use. So sometimes you actually could do more subtle and have like a gradient. It doesn't have to be just pure black, pure white. It can be grey, but sometimes it's reduced down to be different alphas. So you want to check with the company that you're working for what level of grey can be included in your alpha channels. And for the purpose of masks, obviously it doesn't matter. So for example, if I select my brush, if I select my brush, which is this one, brush tool, and if I go to here, and if I can put it on grey, or I can put it on black and just have a low opacity. And I've selected this layer because you can see this white outline. If I select this one, you can see a white outline. Be careful that you've selected the one that you intend to select. If I go over here, and I'm just drawing, so basically I'm saying to the mask, show me less of this colour, because I've got, you know, like a dark grey selected, it's on lower opacity, and I'm drawing on here, so you can sort of see that here I'm painting grey. You know, so you can keep doing that. When I'm doing like scratches and that kind of thing, you know, a lot of times I'll go to an opacity, a mask layer, and I'll just be painting and just trying to add some randomness, you know, and I find the best way to do that is by playing with the opacity of the brush, you know, just to break it up a bit. Okay, let me show you sort of an example of that. So, I'm going to do a letter. Just 1 second, while my computer thinks about it. Okay. Okay. So I was doing like an ammo box or something, and it had a letter on it. What I would do is, when you do a text, sorry, I'm going off the topic a little bit. I won't be able to edit it until I flattened it. So there's a few ways to do it, but what I usually do is create another layer, which is this one. Select it. Hold Control, select the text. So select the layer, select the text, and I do Control and E. Now it's a flattened layer that I can edit. The other way, I'm sure there used to be, there we go, rasterize, yeah, it's like type, and that'll do the same thing. So whichever you prefer. So say if I did now a mask layer, I've got my black, I've got my brush. You can click this button here for brush. And what I do is click B on the keyboard, B for brush. I'm going to choose the brush. Something with a little bit of I don't want it too smooth because I want to make it something that's worn. Sorry, I hit F5 on the keyboard, and F5 comes up with your brushes. So it comes up with, in the brush mode here, it comes up with the brushes that you can choose and you can edit. If I if I click brush preset, I can then click on things and I'll see an image of it at the bottom, what it looks like, and then you can change the settings here, but again maybe we'll go through that in the next tutorial. But just to know, if you want to choose a basic brush, the ones we use quite a lot are a hard brush and a soft brush, but I'll show you the difference between those in just a second. So for my text, what I want to do is just make it look a little bit more worn, because say this is like painted on. something and it's just been worn away. So I'm on my mask, so I'm not destroying the original. And I'm just painting in. Sometimes I'll do it pretty large as well. So put my on the keyboard next to P, you've got like a bracket. One's a square bracket, and the one next to it's another bracket. There's two types of brackets. I'm not sure what the names are. If you have your brush and you press the brackets, one makes it smaller, one makes it larger. So you can do that there, or you can come over here and use a slider to make the brush larger or smaller. You might be using the brush and think, well, all I've got is this little crosshair. Where's the actual size of my brush? How come I don't see it? What's going on? And all that is your caps lock is on. Turn your caps lock off, and then you'll see the brush again. The brush will still work if you're doing it the other way. You just don't get a good visual representation of it. Sometimes I'll do that accidentally, have the caps lock, on and not realise. So the Wacom I'm using today isn't my normal Wacom, so the sensitivity and stuff is a bit different than what I'm used to. It's not giving me the results as quickly as I'd normally get them, but I think you're getting the idea. Because when you think of something being, worn and painted on, and it wouldn't be as perfect as when you're creating the normal text. So basically, all I'm wanting to do is just make it a little bit worn and a little bit used. Again, like say that, I'm like, oh, I did it. You can, because here I've got black and white. If I hit X, it just switches the colours around. And also another good thing to know is if I want to get that back to black and white, if you hit D on the keyboard, it's just a shortcut to get black and white in there. So because I've painted in black where I don't want to see it, and now I'm like, oh, actually, I want to change that. What I will do is go back to my brush, and rather than hitting undo, which very welcome to do, I can just paint in the white and see it again. So because it's not disruptive, I'm painting on the mask, I'm not painting the actual layer and using the eraser, which is another thing I could do. I could have chosen the same brush, use the eraser and actually, erase this rather than masking it. But yeah, it's just to get something that feels a little bit more worn. Whereas, like I said, if you've got, you can right click on your mask layer and you can disable it, which means it's still there but you're just not viewing it, or you can delete it. Move that over there so you can see before and after. One's a little bit more worn and one's just, you'd use the text tool. Just mention as well that if I'm in the mask layer, I can't choose colour. I go there, it'll do like a version which is like the grey without the saturation of the red. So if you think that you're on a colour layer and you go to put a colour in, and you're like, oh, why do I not get colour? It's probably because you've got the mask selected. So just be aware of that. So I've made a quick text layer and I've collapsed it. I just wanted to show you about, you know, I mentioned before about creating like alphas and that kind of thing. So if I'm doing a plant, for example, for a game, I want to create an alpha channel. So for that, again, as I said, that the black you won't see and the white you will see. So in this scenario, I've got black text and white background. So if I save this out on an alpha channel, I wouldn't actually see the writing, I'd just see the background, and there'd be a void where the writing is. So what I want to do, in this case I can do it because my image is black and white. Control I on the keyboard will invert. So then what I want to do is copy this onto a channel. So remove this one. That won't already be there, I actually saved it out. So you've copied that, you've inverted it, so now we will see it. Let's do it the longer way for now, not to confuse you. Go select all, edit, copy merge. You could just do copy, but I'm copy merge I prefer to do, because what I will see in the canvas I will copy. Because sometimes if I have layers and I just do copy, I'll only copy the layers I've got selected. So a lot of times I just copy merge. So I go to channel, click on this little button here, new channel, alpha channel is already there. Click on the alpha channel, and if you go to edit, paste, then here I can see that that's what I've now got in my alpha channel. So I will turn that layer off, because here my text is white when I actually want my text in the diffuse to be black. So I've just turned that layer off. I can save. Now I can save it as a Photoshop file, and what that means is, we spoke before about having lots of layers in the scene. So if I save it as a Photoshop layer, when I open it again, for some reason my computer, this file is a TGA and this file is a PSD, but in my thumbnails it says that both are PSD and they're not. Yeah, so I can see here type, so I actually want the PSD that I saved. I open that, I've got my layers. So if I wanted to make changes to the text, I'll open the PSD version of the file. So what I saved out then was PSD. So now if I go save as, and this is the file I'll use for game, and it's a TGA. I'll call that, you know, whatever the name convention is for my game. I've got one already saved out, that's why it's asking me, but if it's the first time saving, you won't be asked, do you want to override it? So if I save a 24-bit, I'm going to show you the difference. If I save 24, and save it again, and we'll call it copy, and this time we're going to choose 32. Sometimes when you bring a TGA in your game engine, it's not working. This is probably the reason why it's not working. You've accidentally saved it as a 24, not as 32. Now, these are both TGA files I've opened. One is a 24, one is a 32. You'll see that you won't get the layers, because that's only saved out in the PSD, the Photoshop file. So channels, this is a 24-bit. Oh my god, there's no alpha. And in the 32, there's an alpha channel. The difference between the 32 and 24 is actually saving out that channel information. So if you don't see it, you've saved out accidentally as a 24-bit, and that's the difference. Because sometimes you might actually want a TGA because your game engine for just a diffuse colour just has TGA format. Now in that instance you will want to save it out as a 24-bit because you're not actually using information from an alpha channel. It might not even have an alpha channel. So in that instance, if this was just a diffuse and you want to save it out, you want to see, you know, this image with a white background with black text, then you save it out as 24-bit, so it's an image file, and that's what you'll see. Whereas the 32-bit, you're actually having a mask. Now the mask on a 32-bit, you can bring it in, and sometimes the software you're using, you'll have to define it. You'll have to say, if you've got a channel, an alpha channel, use it. So sometimes, you know, I can use something with an alpha channel with a 32-bit, and sometimes I might want to actually keep the 32, like keep the channel, but not use it. So just because you've got an alpha channel, it won't automatically be recognised as an alpha channel. Just to be aware of that, you don't always have to use it. So you've got minimise and maximise windows. You can maximise it again. But sometimes if I've got a few windows in the scene, like if I duplicate, I've got quite a lot in the scene then, and I can't easily select between the two. If you hit F on the keyboard, so you don't really see exactly what that means because this region I'm recording isn't my whole screen, but that will flip through the different, like full screen, to see different canvases and that kind of thing. So if ever the canvas view isn't what you want, hit the F key. Sometimes what I do as well is if I go window, range, tile, you know, you can tile them and then you can actually see them again. You can see what you've got in your in Photoshop opened up. So yeah, you can cascade them. So sort of if I lose a window and I don't know where it's gone off screen, or I've minimised it but it's not showing me down here, I'll go to again the arrange window. So as I said before, the name you can change, and that's when you save it. You can type in, you know, whatever name you'd like. You can change the image size and the canvas size, and it's important to realise the difference between the two. So if I change my image size, so say if I make it 512, everything has sort of shrunk from a 1K to a 512. So everything on the image has changed. Whereas if I go image canvas size and I want to just change the canvas, this is percent by the way, so percent I want it to be 110%, have more area to draw on. The actual size of those letters is the same, it's just added extra around the edges. So I don't know if you can see that when I undid it forward, but it just adds and takes away around the border. So different way of showing you this. Okay, so now if I go to image canvas size, percent, you don't have to do it so it's all around. Sometimes I'll make a texture, or I'll be working with an image and I want to make it more extra room at the bottom. So I click on the arrows, so that means the arrows show you where you're adding to. So I'm adding to down here, I'm adding to over here. If I add numbers, values into the height and width So say if I kept the width the same, but I added an extra bit to the bottom. Right, so say if I did that, you'll see there I've added. So you can do that, and so you just be aware that there's the image size and canvas size. Let's go through a few of these things. So we've got select, the move tool. So say if I'm on brush and say I've got my letter. If I hit V on the keyboard, I get it as well, but you can click it. And what it means is then I'm actually moving this around. So when I click, the function of my click is moving. I can also use the arrow keys on the keyboard, up, down, left and right, to move it. The next one down is our selection tool. We've got different options there, so different like square, circle and so on. Up here you've got feathering, so that's sort of like, I wouldn't say a buffer, but it's sort of how much it's feathering, that is what it is. It's just to add a bit, so it's not a sharp selection, you've got a little bit of fall off with that selection. So depending on what you want, you might add a value or you might not. You can do plus and take away when you select, so I use the keyboard shortcuts because it's a lot quicker. So if I drag select by left clicking on the mouse, if I hold Alt and click, it will take away from that selection. If I hold Shift, it will add to the selection. So again, Alt, sorry I accidentally hit the Windows key, I do that quite a lot. So select, Alt is take away, holding Shift and clicking is adding. So I use that quite a bit for my selections. We've then got Lasso Tool, so we can do it by just Control D is deselect, and if I accidentally lost that selection then because I picked up something else, you can go select, reselect, and because it was the last thing selected, it will then re-give you that selection. But I'm going to deselect, Control D, and go to this lasso just to show you what it is. So again, I'm using my Wacom, and it's just basically whatever I draw around. So I use this a lot if I'm editing photos and say I've got a picture of a dog and I want to add that to a picture of me. So I can literally, wherever the dog is, I can just select around him and then copy and paste and that kind of thing. So the lasso tool is quite useful. We've got this one which is more of straight lines, which can be useful again. I'm just clicking, and if you double click, it will sort of close the selection, as it were. We've got magnetic, and the magnetic is based on colour. So let me show you an example of that. If you hit spacebar, you're sort of moving your view. You're not moving the actual canvas, you're just moving the view. So I use that a lot. So I've got this magnetic one selected, and if I've clicked, and now I'm just drawing. I don't keep clicking. You can if you want, and it's basically putting a selection where it thinks the edge of the colour is. So that can be useful. Sometimes if it goes a bit wrong, I tend to sort of, you can click as well if you want to define it. Again, double click to sort of close that selection. So I do use that quite a bit as well. But again, with the selection, no matter which, if you're using this one or this one, you can add and subtract with the same keys. So I can take away and I can add to the selection. The next one down is the wand tool, so magic wand. So this is saying in my image, select a colour with the tolerance of 5. So if I had I guess a good way of showing you. I'm hitting Control and plus on the keyboard, and that zooms in. Control minus zooms out, because sometimes you'll see me zooming on something. You can do that quite a lot. So say I've got this with gradient. So if I click here, it's going to select the specific colour. So everything that's within that colour that I'm clicking on, it's going to select. Whereas if I ramp this up and say 50%, it's going to choose a wide variety, because you're saying the pixel I've clicked on, if it's that colour or 50% either way, then select it. So yeah, just to be aware that if you are trying to just get to one colour specifically, play around with the tolerance. So just to show you quickly. The difference between this button here, so one will be select within that area, and the other one is, you know, in that layer, select all of it. So select all the black in that scene. I just want to do so select all the black. Whereas you might just actually just want to select one of them. So that's good to know for that. You can also, if you've got, you can sample all layers as well. So you might have colouring on the whole picture you want to select, but it's not necessarily on the layer that you've got selected. It might actually be made up in different layers. So that's good to know. You can sample all layers. The next button we've got is the crop tool, and that could be, say I didn't actually want more in my image than just that. I'll crop it. So the image now has changed. So the image size and canvas size has changed. So again, you can draw it and then you can tweak it, and you can also bring it out. So actually, if you wanted more canvas size again, you'll do it. But the moment you crop it, it's deleted all around it. So what I mean is, say if I crop that, and then I say actually I want to do more, you're not going to get back the rest of the piece. That's gone. You've cut it. So by doing that, that's what's happening. You're basically saying, can you cut the image around this defined area? I'm hitting Control Z on the keyboard. Which you could also go step forward, step backwards. So Control Z. The next one down, I think it's Lasso Tool. I don't really use. The healing brush is a little bit like the clone tool, which you might, if you've done your art before, you've probably come across it and heard it. So say I'm on a new layer and I want to copy this piece, or parts of the piece, like say if it was a tree branch for example, rather than like, you might just want to copy bits of it. So I want to say all layers, I want to copy, so I hover over the bit I want to copy, I hit Alt and I click, and that's defining the area. And you can see now when I paint, on the left you can see the crosshair, and that's showing me where I'm copying from. You know, so you can do that, you can copy. can change the area. Again, I'm just going over what I want to copy and hitting Alt, and then you just click and draw. And you can change opacity. Again, with many of the functions and tools, you've got opacity options. So yeah, that's a tool I use a lot. I think healing, the difference is if you're doing things like brickwork and that kind of thing, instead of copying it directly, what the healing brush will do, it does a better blend between what you're copying from and what you're copying to. So healing is more subtle and it multiplies better, whereas cloning, it literally is taking what you've selected, barring the opacity slider. It's not really blending between what you've got and what you want. It's just copying and pasting basically. The next tool down, what have we got? History brush tool. Can't say I've ever used it. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't, it's just I haven't. The erase is pretty straightforward. Again, you can play with the opacity. So I do that a lot when I'm doing my work. I want to erase just a little bit, not 100%. Again, for brushes, if you hit F5, the same brushes that are available to you then when you have the drawing brush. So you might want a soft fall off or a more hard edge to what you're erasing. The next one down is gradient. So I used that a second ago. So I've got black and white. You can click drag and it's going to do a gradient. The reason I don't see it is because this layer is in my folder and my folder isn't visible. So I'm just going to move it to the top. Just click and drag. Right, so now it's at the top. So the gradient doesn't have to be black and white. You can put colours in it. It's got different presets. So you can use it. I do use these a bit, to be fair. Again, there's other presets that you can use, and you can edit them as well. I don't often edit them. This one's quite good. It's like you can do them so that it's transparent as well, so it doesn't have to be solid. So if you double click on it, then you can edit. So you can say like, it's the foreground colour, this is the foreground, that's the background colour, so foreground colour red to transparent. So you're having that blend. I've got my new layer. So you can see here that I've gone from red to transparent. But like I said, you can change it. You can change and you can add colours and the amount of fall off and where it starts to, it could be quite harsh at the end, or do you know what I mean? So you've got a lot of options to tweak and to change and to add. I can come in here, I can say, okay, do that, let's go to blue at the end. So you can add colours in, it doesn't have to necessarily be two. You can change it, and again I just click and drag. So I've got my blues and reds and such. So that's good to play with and good to know that it's there. We've got our blur tool, and sometimes if you go away and hover over it, you'll get some information. Right, blur tool. That's saying if you hit R, so when you go over, it's got like in brackets a letter, and that's your keyboard shortcut. If you right click, you get a little bit of extra options on some of them. So if I go to blur, I've got blur, sharpen and smudge. Just going to pause a second while I bring in an image. 1 second. Okay, to show you the next tool, I've just brought in a quick picture of wood, and I've got this from CG Textures, which is a really good website for picture references. So, okay, cgtextures.com. So I brought in just a JPEG, and to bring it into my PSD sort of thing, as it were, I just literally click on the layer and I drag it over. And that's how you get images into, or new things into your file. Right, so it's in there now. Going to go to blur tools for the zoom in. So blur, literally that's what it says on the thing. You know, it blurs when it's clicking, and so it'll just blur it out. Sharpen will just try and sharpen it up. So, see what I mean? It sort of tries to calculate where the definition in the pixels are and bring them out. So sometimes, it can add a little bit. So let me just, I'll copy. So I'm using too much of this. If I go with it, go new layer and paste. I'm not sure why this is happening. Originally I did Control J on the keyboard. So I've got the tool selected here, so sharpen tool, and if I paint on, so you can see now if I turn it off and on, that's why I just copy the layer, so you can see the before and after. That's what the sharpen tool does. The next tool we've got is the smudge, and that literally when you click down it grabs the pixels and you're pulling them into the direction that you're moving your brush or your mouse. Hopefully it's your brush. So I use this one a lot when I'm doing like rust and like water running down on things. Yeah, I use that. And then smudge tool as well, I use quite a bit on normal maps, just to do normal map fixes in some of the areas that didn't render out as well as I was hoping. So yeah, these are good sort of tools for fixing normal maps. The next one down, I use a burn tool every now and then. So again, a lot of these you'll learn by just messing about with them. So you're basically adding to the highlights, midtone, shadows, and giving them like a slight burn, which is good if you want to do like wear and tear on things. A bit weathered look or a bit used look, that's quite good. The pen tool and also the line tool, they are really good, but I don't use them enough, I feel, to be able to show you the functionality of them. So, but yeah, UI artists I think use them a lot more. So the shapes, custom shapes, and the pen tool particularly. We're doing vectors where you can then scale up, scale down, and you're keeping the smoothness of an outline. Whereas if you're doing it by brush or pixels on the lasso selection, you're actually, at the time you're scaling up and scaling down, you're losing that resolution. Whereas doing artwork with vectors and that kind of thing, and the lines, it's very much more precise and it saves it. So if you want to look at UI or icon design, that kind of thing, then yeah, you want to listen to the pen tools and play about more with the shape tool. Shapes, sometimes maybe you go to load shape. If you had a download pack, that's one thing with the brushes, sorry, is when you go to, you hit F5, you can go to load, so you can load in brushes. If you type in Google, free Photoshop brushes, there's a lot available. Obviously with terms and conditions, because you might not be able to use them in a more professional setting, so at your job you might not be allowed to use certain brushes. So just read the copyright and that on the brushes that you download, but there are quite a good selection of brushes out there, and you can load them in. So same with the shapes, you can download and load in shapes. The OK will and same with the brushes, OK will delete what you've got and add the new selected. Append will always add on to. I always do append, and you can click and drag it out to get more. And these are just your basic shapes, so you might be making something and this is a good starting point. But I think once in 8 years if I've used this. So I really don't use this often. And if I used it, it's probably for like a quick arrow or something. So back up to the text tool. We used that before briefly, so there's different settings for that. If I just do the standard. So just like using like Microsoft Word or email or whatnot, you can choose different styles of text. You can go bold, you can change the size here. Again, just subtle changes. You can do a line, you can change the colour of them, you can add the deformation to them. So so there's, again, it's just play about with them. And this is to do with spacing, so do you want them more space between the letters? Do you want the letters to be longer? Yeah, again, just play about with them really. But like I said, don't forget, if you're trying to like edit text with a brush, you can't do that unless you've collapsed it. So just bear that in mind. Again, you can right click and you can rasterize. Usually what I'll do, if I've got a text that I'm happy with, I will copy it, because if I do flatten it and then I want to add more text to it later, you can't really do it. Whereas if I've kept the text, I've got a good starting point. But if I've done too much to the flattened version, well then obviously you wouldn't necessarily go back to the start again. But I do keep the text as a reference as to what text type I use and that kind of thing. So I always, when I'm working, I have a lot of base layers and then edited layers. So I like to keep backups just in case I do want to make a change to something based on either just my own opinion or colleagues' feedback or leads' feedback. I've got somewhere, I've got a starting point I can go back to. So having backups, so it might just be like a folder that I've created and I've called it, base. That's my base file. So everything I bring in, like for example, like I've done that text, I'll make a copy and I'll put it in with the wood. Before I do something, I'll make a copy. And as well, sometimes when I'm working, like with this, I'll do it on layers. So if I'm happy, I have that. I make changes, I'm happy with that, I'll make another layer So if I do decide that I've done something on this layer and I don't quite like it, I don't have to go back to square one. I've got a stage in between. So, you know, every now and then I will just make a layer. Just again, it's just time saving for should there be changes that are required later. So layers, extra layers, with different stages of what you're doing on, and then a base folder which would have the files that you've first created, whether it be text or you've brought in a new image. I keep that, and I keep it safe. I just keep it turned off, and when I'm happy with it as well, I can just lock it. I know that the originals I'm not gonna accidentally edit. Another tool I use a bit is Colour Picker. And it does lots of things. It just selects colours. If I'm using a brush, so I've got the brush tool selected. You see here how I've got the brush tool selected, but I can't paint. And if you try and paint, it will say couldn't use it because the target layer is hidden. And that's because I'm on a folder, I'm not on a layer, and also I'm not on something that's visible. So if I go up to this, for example, I can draw on because it's a layer that's visible and it's a layer that's appropriate to be drawn on. So yes, say if I'm drawing and then I think, oh, actually I want to add a bit more of this colour, rather than going to click on this and then go back to my brush, what I will do is, if I'm on brush, I've got green, I'll hit Alt on the keyboard and click, and that whatever I'm clicking on, as long as I've got Alt held down, it will select that colour. If I hit X on the keyboard, as I mentioned earlier, it will bring the background to the foreground. So if I wanted to have that colour and then that colour, and I thought, oh no, actually I want red and then green, I will do that. And again, I can paint. Because sometimes you don't want to keep selecting the colour. If you want two colours and you're happy with those and you want to work between the two, just hit the X and go through like that. You've got plus and minus, but again I don't use the actual button, I just use Control, hold down Control and I press the plus and minus, which is near the numbers keypad by numlock on my keyboard. Plus and minus. Control Shift S will save as, so it'll bring up your save window. And like I said before, there's different types that you can do. Control S, if you've already saved it once, so this has been saved as a PSD, so that means if I do Control S, it will save. I don't have to re-put in the name, it's already sorted for me. If you do have a really big file, when you save it, you'll see sometimes down here there'll be like a progress bar. Sorry, I just realised my window there for recording has moved. I realise now that this video is probably over an hour long. I'm just going to go over a couple of other little things that I feel that you should know, and then I'll call it a day for this introduction video. The one thing I want to show you is this filters. So this is good, you know, for adding extra detail or styles or that kind of thing. So you can click on them. So I just realised that when I open that, it doesn't adhere to the window that I've set for Photoshop. It actually goes a little bit out of that. I'm trying to bring it in a bit. So this is the window that you'll get, and as you can see, you can just click on them, and you can also adjust the settings as well with sliders. Yeah, play about with those. Sometimes you get some nice results. But a lot of times if I'm using this, something in here, I won't have that layer 100% opacity. Like normally I'm doing this to get some type of noise or some type of blur to an image. But people use them in different ways. So yeah, there's a lot of good things in the filter option. I just want to show you another one. So say we've got this image that I've brought in. Control T on the keyboard gives you this transform. And you can transform something. And if you right click, you can do different things. So if I Control T, transform, right click, I can scale, and I see these little squares, and that's the points that where I can move them from. So I can just click on one and move it. What I do quite a lot is if you click on one corner and hold Alt and Shift, it will scale it from the midpoint, so you can see the midpoint is here. You can move that midpoint by clicking Control. Then if I did Shift Alt, it sort of does it from that location, not center point. So again, Control T, I can do perspective, and that changes perspective on it, the angle. You can do a warp. It gives you very limited control points. But there is a feature in Photoshop to warp with a lot more control. We'll go over that in a more advanced settings video. And then you've also got, your rotate, if you wanted to rotate it. If you wanted to flip it, vertical, horizontal. But just to be aware, if you wanted to transform something, that's a quick way of doing it. So what I wanted to show you is, say this is my texture for a game, and I want it to be tileable. So a quick way of doing it is I copy it. If you go Filter, Other, Offset, try to click that correctly, offset. I've got horizontal and vertical, so in this instance I'll do it so that the texture can be tiled both ways. So you'll see now if I move it over, you can see a hard line here, and that's what I want to fix. So I can fix that one first. So there's different ways of doing it. What I tend to do, some people will get the clone stamp tool. I'll clone from one bit and try and paint down the middle. So yes, you can do that. What I tend to do is on this layer, I'll sort of erase the middle section, and then I'll set the eraser to be a lot less. So now I'm not getting 100%, I'm not getting hard lines when I erase. But I'm going to as close to the corner as possible, but not going on the corner, because if I go to the corner I'm going to create new scenes. And whenever I do tileable textures in Photoshop, I usually have a plane open in Max or whichever 3D package you use, have that open, just so that you can test it that it's tiled. There is ways of doing it in Photoshop, but I just find it so much easier and quicker just to see it on plain tiles. So I copy that base layer down again just to collapse it. Okay, so now this is the same as the base, only we've fixed the tiling on one of the axes, so we've fixed it on the horizontal. So if I go vertical, not as noticeable, but you can still see it. So again, it's the same process. What I should have done before, like I would have labelled this, you know, original. And let's stop off this. And then this one I'll just put edited. Okay, and then same again. You could go more in depth with the descriptions, but that's enough. So again, you can do the same thing again where you're erasing, or if you want, you can try the clone stamp tool. But again, be careful where this brush is going, because if you're doing this and you're painting down here, you're creating a new seam here. So be careful when you're fixing seams not to paint along the edge, keep your distance. So just to let you know that that's where it was, the offset, and that's a rough explanation of how we will make tileable textures. Which is one more thing I quickly want to show you. If you do Control U on the keyboard, you get the hue, saturation and lightness of your image. So if I copy that, Control U, I can change it to different hues. You can play about with those, or say I've got an image that hasn't got colour, I can hit colorize and I can, you know, make it be a certain colour that I want. One other thing I should show you as well, go to image adjustments. There's lots of different things here that we use quite a bit. So the main one would be brightness contrast. Again, playing about with them, you'll soon enough realise what they do. Okay. So what I'm going to do is go duplicate just to show you one tool. Plus on that. Okay. Right. So say I've got this image and I want to match the colours in this one. What I can do is, if I'm on my layer, image adjustments, I believe it's match colour, and down here I can do a source, so I want to choose my other Photoshop file, and I can go okay, and again you can play with some of the settings here and whatnot. So that's good if you do want to match a colour or something. That's a good way of doing it. One thing I use quite a lot as well, once I finish my texture or while I'm working through it, I'll do Control L on the keyboard, and that brings up levels, and it's showing you your white, light to dark values, I believe it's white to black values. So I can bring those in and play about with it just to add a little bit more sharpness and, you know, in my image. So you've gone from that to that. Sometimes you find that your image is too, it's not, I'm not sure the word is that I'm looking for, but it doesn't have enough punch. So, you know, playing about with the levels helps. Another way to get to levels is we've got different options here in this button. So you click it, you'll get, I do levels, you'll get a layer like value. So it's not actually changing the layer, it's actually adding it to a different... So let's copy that and I'll show you what I mean. So if I go levels, everything underneath this, the levels will change. So I'm happy with that. But I might not actually want to change the levels on something that, say, if these were overlaid, so I can see through. I can see through to this, but I actually don't want this blue one to be affected by my levels. So again, I'm back to either I can put these in a folder, what I tend to do, the levels on top, so I can do it on a folder. Or, as we mentioned before, how got those visible, I can just lock it to a specific layer. So those ones below are not affected by it. But in here you've got a few different options as well. So you have got brightness and contrast, you've got your hue, saturation. So you've got a few things there that you might want to add as a separate, not really a layer, but it's a separate thing. And the reason for doing this again is just for quick changes later. You might have done, for example, I do hue saturation and I change it and tweak it. Later it's quicker to go to this layer than to work out, then maybe to change this layer for whatever reason. You know, and again you can change the opacity so you can do it subtle as well. So it's really, there's different ways to achieve the same things, whether you do things in layers and put them into a group and apply a mask to the folder, that's one thing, or you can apply it to a layer. I think basically the more you use Photoshop, the more you will tailor it to how you like it to work, your workflow. So you can watch videos online like this one that shows you the basics, but it's really what you take away with it when you're working. You'll get a pipeline that works for you. You've got help like any other program. I guess F1 would be loading it in the internet. Yeah. So yeah, you've got help files. There's other tutorials online as well. I'll be doing a more in-depth one later. Again, what you want me to cover, just post in the comments below. But as a quick introduction, I think we'll leave it at that. I don't think there's big elements that I've missed. But again, if you feel that I've missed something or gone over something too quickly or didn't explain something in enough detail, please leave comments. I can't add to my tutorials, or can't improve the next one if I don't get your feedback. So thanks a lot for watching. Do leave feedback.